On this episode of the podcast, I have with me Tim Edgar. He is co-founder and CTO at Venteur. We're going to be talking about finding and understanding end-user problems. We're going to be talking about where that inspiration comes from. He's going to share some stories from his background and experiences at different startups. And actually, we're going to be talking about how he's found a joy in leveraging data and how that's a common thread in a lot of the work that he's done. And we're going to be talking about co-founders and complementary skills and how that overlap helps. And we're going to see how much more we can get in there. Tim, thank you for taking the time.
Thank you, Amir. It's a pleasure to be here.
That again,
bit about myself, bit about the company.
100% before I start recording, and it was like
Venteur,
10, so
4 years old,
not 100%
Series A startup. We're in the health benefit space, specifically what we do.
My fear of that process, but okay.
Employees should be the center of decision making.
All right, I think
we help employers provide tax-free money to employees, and employees get to decide how that's spent on their own personalized insurance plan, qualified medical expenses. This is in place of a one-size-fits-no-one group plan that most people experience today in the workforce.
Okay.
This also saves employers money. It's a win-win. One of the few areas that has bipartisan support in healthcare.
On this episode of the
we
podcast,
just think this is the norm of how
Tim Edgar.
You're going to see things over the next 5 years, the same way we saw in the retirement space.
We're going to be talking about finding and understanding. That is a whole episode in and of itself, Tim. So we might have to have you come back and dive into that for us as well. This episode, we're going to talk a little bit about the finding and understanding those end user problems, and really that topic was born of your background, right? And kind of what you've done through your whole career. And you mentioned that really understanding and leveraging data has been a bit of a core and a theme to a lot of the startups. Can you kind of walk us through and tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. I think the few different pieces when I think about the different startups I founded have come from something that is deeply personal, an observation of human behavior, something that has some sort of quantitative, this is a very massive problem that we can see backed by various sort of data sources, mixed into really giving myself as well as my team a really strong sense of purpose. Startups are hard. You need to have that sense of mission to really kind of push through the tough times. And so some examples of this, if I think about my first startup, Leafly, was in the energy space. The thing that kind of woke me up a little bit, I learned that the average household takes about 200 trees
is a whole episode in and of itself, Tim. So
offset
we might have
their
to
energy
come back
consumption.
And,
so we think about people's power bills, like you can save $5,
this episode,
and they get all this messaging from
we're going to talk a little bit about
save energy.
The
I was like, wow, that's
finding
like
and
deeply
understanding those
personal.
end user
Like,
problems.
I can,
that
be planting
topic
trees, and trees are
of your background, right? And kind of what you've done through your whole career. And you mentioned
the cost curves and
really
looking at things nationally in terms of
data
how much money is being spent to turn on peaker plants to
a lot of the startups. Can you kind of walk us through and tell us a little bit about that?
So oftentimes I will take those emotional things and go talk with people and validate, and I think that's a key component of that journey. I think similarly with the current startup with Venteur, part of it comes from personal experience. My co-founder, my big sister, Stacy, she and us, we grew up in an individual family plan. We ourselves owned our own decisions. And the reason for that was our parents were small business owners. We saw the benefit of having that stability and continuity. Our father got really sick in his first year of his business. This is a happy story. We're glad to celebrate next month his 71st birthday. And the only reason we saw that true is the fact that the system took care of him. This is like all the doctors, when we go to the hospital, everyone knows them, the staff knows them, the insurance company fights for him, which is really strange. But when you have a 35-year relationship with a health insurance company, the dynamic is different. And the data point that we were looking at was employers today spend $1.6 trillion on health insurance. And that all this decision is not being made by employees for employees. People are changing things from, I might have a Kaiser plan one year, I might have a Blue Shield plan another year, and then my entire care network gets disrupted. And how does that really help us be healthier and really live like long and fulfilling lives? And so those sort of observations where we talk with people and we're like, hey, like suppose you have this money and suppose you have, extra couple of $1,000, like, would this be healthier for you? Suppose you didn't get changed, your doctors didn't change. And so there's a lot of talking with people, but it stems from that one, emotional connection, and two, is this problem big enough to be worth solving?
Interesting. I guess you mentioned speaking to others, validating the problem, whether the problem is something you should go tackle. I'd like to maybe ask you a follow-up there, because sometimes you see founders that are just, it's a gut. They just know there's a market. People might think they're crazy for actually pursuing a potential solution to a problem, but they're like, no, I'm going to go do this. And that is their path. And then I'm talking to founders that like to go and talk to the customer. They like to do the market research, make sure that they're not, building a solution in hopes of finding a problem. It sounds like you like that approach of making sure there is a true problem to solve before you, throw. And again, I think both ways. We've seen tons of success both ways. I don't think there's a right or wrong way. But when you do go speak to people, and when you are hoping to validate your idea, and you've been a serial founder, what are you listening for? Because I think sometimes it's hard for people to ask for advice and ask for insights, but actually to know what to pick out and pick up when they're hearing what somebody else is saying.
I look for an emotional connection. I look for something that triggers a deeper response. And so when...
Interesting.
I mean, it's really
I guess you mentioned speaking to others, validating the problem, whether
those data
the problem is something you should go tackle. I'd like to maybe ask you a follow-up there, because sometimes you see founders that are just
ups and downs of those.
It's a gut. They just know there's a market.
As much
People
as
might think they're crazy for actually pursuing a potential solution to a problem, but they're like, no, I'm going to go do this, and that is their path.
Some sort of connection.
And then I'm talking to founders that like to go and talk to the customer. They like to do the market research, make sure that they're not building a solution in hopes of finding a problem.
There's cases where
it sounds like
it's a little bit of a tangent.
Like that
some
approach
of the
of making sure there's a true problem to solve before you throw.
And
again, I think both ways.
Inspiration often came from just going to customer studies, site visits, and
but
listening
when
to
you do go speak to
the advice I usually have for that is,
you are hoping to validate your idea.
If you're going into that conversation trying to validate your own hypothesis, oftentimes it's just going to be confirmation bias.
Because I think sometimes it's hard for people to
person as a
ask for advice and ask for insights, but actually to know what to pick out and pick up
you
when
treat yourself,
you
treat the person you talk to as the master of the craft. And you're trying to learn their ways, and you're trying to just understand, why do you do this? Tell me more. Can you teach me these things? And that really uncovers what they truly believe in a unbiased manner, as well as some of the deeper elements that get to the emotion, the why of that customer feedback.
I love that. You mentioned obviously being at Microsoft, and somebody can probably go look you up on LinkedIn to get the exact chronology. But you did start, I guess, at Microsoft. You went off, started as, founded Leafly, went back to Microsoft, and then obviously you've been back in the startup space. I guess talk to us a little bit about that experience, because I think sometimes... And actually, I think it's changing, but I think for a while there was a bit of a stigma of working at big tech and then going to be a founder. And I'm seeing a lot more people coming out of big tech companies that are becoming founders. And I guess maybe the one thing that you might hear as well, if you've not worked in that type of entrepreneurial startup type environment, it's a little bit hard. I guess talk to us a little bit about being able to experience some of that entrepreneurship within Microsoft.
Totally, and I would say that my experience may not be uniform for the whole industry. My vice president, when I was intern, as well as when I first started at Microsoft, was Satya Nadella. I was on the team that helped launch Bing, Microsoft's search engine. As an intern, I was able to get some time with him to pitch him concepts and ideas. As a full-time employee, I was able to do the same thing, go to his office hours and present what I was observing in market and what I think we should be investing in. He has a saying that
you mentioned obviously being at Microsoft,
for every employee to create impact.
Somebody can probably go look you up on LinkedIn to get the exact chronology. But you did start
I
guess
love
you
the
did
fact
start
that
at
you do
Microsoft.
something you could affect
You went off,
millions of
started
people,
and founded
that
Leafly.
all this kind
went
of
back
drove
to
me
Microsoft,
to
and then obviously
have this
been back in the
appreciation
startup
for what
space.
Microsoft is doing.
I guess talk to us a little bit about that experience, because
First month on the job, I was able to go to Satya's office
I think
hours,
it's changing, but I think
pitch,
for a while there was a bit of a
seeing
stigma of working
a search
at big
program
tech and then going
in
to be a
5-10
founder. And I'm
minutes,
seeing a lot
manner.
more people
He
coming out of
fully understood it,
big
took
tech
action.
companies that are
There's a set of
becoming
things
founders.
where,
And I guess maybe the one thing
a
that
few weeks
you
later
might hear as
working on that
well,
project to kind of
if
bring
you've
it to
not worked
fruition.
in that type of
That product
entrepreneurial
today
startup type
of
environment, it's
those
a little bit hard.
conversations is actually what you see
I guess talk to us a
Microsoft
little bit
rewards,
about being able to experience some of that
form
entrepreneurship within
today.
Microsoft.
And so that listening and treating every employee as an entrepreneur is something that I hope to take in all my companies as well, to treat all our employees knowing that they are seeing unique things in the market. They have unique ideas, and how we can support them to, at least for Venteur, help make American healthcare better.
That's a great story. I love that. I guess when you are moving forward and you've had a chance to kind of, build your own companies, and this is maybe more of a toolbox question, because obviously you did spend a decent amount of time at Microsoft. When you're looking at the tools that are transferable and they are applicable to the startup, obviously the one you just mentioned is a great story. Are there other tools that you picked up that you were able to apply? Because I know there's probably some that you can't maybe, and that's fine, but are there other tools that you were able to transfer over with that experience?
So one thing that I think, just when you're dealing with product at scale at Microsoft, is dealing with large volumes of data and dealing with lots of customers and learning how to be able to slice and dice data, learn from behavioral signals, and to really kind of dive in. And so I, data geek, data nerd, love this aspect where we are learning from the wisdom of the community. Part of, the reason why I joined Bing in the first place was this belief and mission of elevating and democratizing this sort of wisdom. This is, in startups, it's often difficult to get that sort of large scale of data, but the same kind of precision questioning of how might we get data or construct it, I think, is a very powerful skill.
It's a great story. I love that.
Especially just in the
I guess when
problem
you
framing and hypothesis
moving
and
forward and
aspect.
you've had a chance
I have, a question like, what color should
build
I
your own companies?
Make the search links on Bing?
And this is maybe more of a toolbox question, because obviously
test this out and get data and help validate.
You
might have that same sort of,
when you're looking at
what is the most impactful,
transferable, and they are
area that our product
to the startup. Obviously, the one you
Venteur
just mentioned is a great
next 3
story.
months.
Are there other tools that you picked up that you were able to apply? Because I know there's probably some that you can't maybe, and that's fine. But are there other tools that you were able to transfer over with that experience?
That you are constantly trying to disprove your own thesis and gathering data. That data will look a little bit different because you don't have the same level of resources, but that mentality and process will be the same.
Fantastic. I love that. You mentioned your sister's your co-founder?
Yes.
Okay. So obviously, I'd love to understand. And I know, you mentioned finding the right co-founder is obviously, having those complementary skill sets is very important. I'd love to understand a little bit more of that relationship, finding those complementary skills that you found within your sister as a co-founder.
Yeah. So we've both took separate paths in our career. I went to big tech startups, things along that lines. She went to the public sector. She worked on behalf of the State Department, often in places like Afghanistan, Myanmar, Philippines, India, implementing various sort of foreign and international development initiatives. What she saw was how to create markets. And if you think about, if you need to have electric vehicles, well, we need to think about the infrastructure, the roads, the charging stations, the power grid. And when you're dealing with these other countries, you have to think more holistically about how you approach innovation. And so in my first startup, when I was in energy and we were funded out of the White House and we were working with the first Obama administration, one of the failures of that company
Fantastic.
was not necessarily for myself understanding the dynamics of the political wins, where in the second administration,
so obviously,
told, hey, do you want to pack this up and
understand? And I know
we're going to shift a lot of
finding the right co-founder is obviously
not necessary energy
having
in
this
the second administration.
Skill sets is
a lot of our commercial deals.
I'd love to understand a little bit more
of the lack of
that relationship,
regulatory
complementary skills that
support
you found within your.
That's what she's great at. And so in my first companies, I'd always pick people I liked working with that complimented me. At least within big tech, for Venteur, what has made it really powerful is the fact that she comes from a completely different background. She thrives in highly regulated environments. She thrives in low infrastructure ecosystems and market development. And we treat healthcare almost like, how would you innovate in the Philippines, or how would you innovate in a country where, let's not assume that you have all this rich infrastructure. It does create a lot of tension where some of my intuition around how to scale and how to build is a little bit different from her intuition, but that is healthy debate and something that has strengthened the company instead of having kind of too much of a monoculture that, at least in the prior company, is like we had some blind spots that ultimately caused the company to go sideways.
How is it working with your sister? And I ask, my brother's my business partner, so this one resonates with me. So this way it might be a selfish question, but I think a lot of people probably heard, oh, he works, co-founder, sister. People have maybe worked with siblings, family. How is that relationship, and how do you manage to separate your childhood from the running the business? Because I think that's probably one of the critical things of making sure you can kind of keep business a lot of times.
I think we embrace it. Be really fair. Our superpower is that we have, she knows all my tells. I know all her tells. We have extremely high bandwidth communication because we can pick up every single thing. So some of my other co-founders might not necessarily read some of my body language, and I might not even know it's myself, where I'm saying one thing, but the rest of my body is communicating something else. So she'll call me out on that, and I'll call her out on that. And if anything, we increase the velocity of communication. We have feedback from our board where they're like, slow down. Like, we need to be involved in this conversation, because sometimes we are able to finish each other's sentences because we have that deep relationship. So we lean on that. As any sort of sibling relationship, there is some level of memories and potentially baggage that's there. I think because we've led separate professional careers for well over a decade, and we saw each other and could respect the professional side of things. And
how is it
the fact that
working
we
with your
have
sister?
two different
And I ask, my brother's my business partner, so this one resonates with me. So this way it might be a selfish question, but I think a lot of people probably heard, oh, he works, co-founder, sister.
What really
people
kind of strengthens us,
siblings, family,
having those two different worldviews.
How is that relationship, and how do you
that we can almost lean on?
I love it. It's actually, I 100%, you talk about the tells. I think it's really interesting because when you do have a company not with family, they can't tell those things, and you're not aware. So I think that dynamic, while obviously I think you're right, you have to kind of embrace it. Otherwise, you won't know what to do with some of the friction sometimes. So that's a really good observation. I was going to ask you, because you did have experience working at big tech, you do have experience with within the startup space. Do you think in hindsight, and obviously it's worked out well, you've been a serial entrepreneur, great career at Microsoft, but if you would have decided to not go to Microsoft and just dive headlong into the startup world, we see that a lot. It's a different path. Is there something, I guess, what are your thoughts on that? Do you feel you would have been as successful? Do you feel you would have been lacking something? Do you just what are your thoughts there?
I think it depends upon how you approach mentorship and learning. So the benefit of big tech is that you're surrounded by people who are industry experts, very well polished, top of their game, and you can just learn from them. You're a sponge, especially out of college, you learn so much. And so that is given to you for free. You can still go build that. And that's actually the same attribute that's so important as a founder. surrounding yourselves with mentors, surrounding yourselves with experts, learning from them. It's why
it's actually I 100% you teach you
by forcing you to meet hundreds of people and to build mentorship relationships.
Family,
we had this retreat.
They can't tell those things
done by one of our advisors,
and you're not aware. So I think that dynamic. Well, obviously,
across all our
I think
team
you're right. You have to kind of embrace it.
We want you to raise your hand.
You won't know what to do
if you have one mentor.
So that's a really good observation.
2 mentors. Some people.
I was going to ask you, because you did 5, have experience
10,
working.
And then suddenly just Stacy and I, both our hands are there, like
with
25, 30, 50.
Space.
And it's really just the founders
in hindsight, and obviously
we have built this network.
The support serial entrepreneur,
we know that it's a team effort.
If you would have decided to not go to Microsoft
expertise is something
and just
that exists
dive
across so many different
into
people.
the
So that's like the
world,
one thing, whether you are within a big company or with your startup. If you have that learning,
I guess what are your thoughts on that? Do you feel
for me,
would have
I
been
didn't
as
have
successful?
to come
Do you
to
feel
that
you would have been
realization
lacking
until
something?
later in life because
just what are your thoughts there?
mentorship network was given to me for free in the infrastructure of big tech, and I do think it is helpful to have that. But the transition is you still need, when you're out in the real world, you have to go build out yourself, and that to me is all the difference between a great founder and a good founder, and even a great founding employee or early stage startup employee versus someone who may not necessarily be able to grow with as the business is growing.
I love that. I want to ask you a question, maybe the final question, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. When you mentioned obviously how you like to identify a problem, and I think that was insightful. When you are in the process of building and you're growing a company, do you think about the end, or do you, at any point, from ideation to launching, do you start thinking about, hey, what am I going to do if this thing grows? Is that even come on your radar, or is it a case of you got to be laser focused, forget about 3 years, 5 years, tomorrow, whatever? Because I think sometimes people do begin things and without an end in mind, they don't know what to do or what that end goal is. And I guess maybe the real question is, how do you identify that end goal to navigate towards if you haven't picked it up early?
For me, my philosophy is vision and next step. It's important for me to know the North Star I'm heading to, and I will spend a lot of time doing that. For Venteur, that is that $1.6 trillion in the hands of employees able to spend. Why that number is meaningful is twice the amount that Amazon sells globally every year. We're talking about true consumerification and free market aspects of healthcare, which I think is going to change just the whole industry in ways that we can't imagine today. That said, I'm not building out this 5-year plan and chess game of here's all different moves. There's so many things I don't know that's going to cause me to react and pivot.
I want to ask you a question.
And I always just think about, great, what is the next step?
But
how do I work towards that North Star?
How do I
crawl?
You mentioned obviously how you
see some ravine that
identify
I can't pass. Great, I'm going to take a detour. I'm going to change directions.
When you are in the process of building,
where I'm heading.
Fantastic. I love that, and it's interesting. I think the more I speak with founders, and it becomes very clear that solving the problem is the end goal, nothing else, because it typically takes care of a lot of the ancillary things that people get consumed with. And the reason I ask this is I do get people who reach out and go, hey, that person started this business, what did you know or why? And you get all these different questions from people when you get to talk to different founders. And a lot of times I'm starting to realize hey, listen, they don't go about trying to do a lot of what you're thinking. They're there just to solve a problem. And how big the company gets is just byproduct of the TAM, the execution, the timing. There's so many factors that you can't probably go into. So I thought your answer was great.
Well, thank you. Appreciate that.
Tim, I know you got to get back to actually trying to solve some of these problems for us. So I'm going to let you go. Before I do, if somebody does have a follow-up question, what is a good way of connecting with you?
2 ways. One, you can find me on LinkedIn. Reach out on LinkedIn. Happy to engage there. Second way, my email is just tim@venteur.com, and feel free to reach out over email as well.
Brilliant. Tim, thanks for your time. I really appreciate it.
Likewise, Amir, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. That's it for the episode. Be back again. Different guest, different topic. Until then, two things. One, I'd love for you guys to share this episode. Tim did a great job of kind of walking us through some of how he approaches finding the problem to solve. We talked about that. We talked about actually his experience at Microsoft and Bing, and shared a great story with he had a moment with Satya Nadella, and how that helped him understand some of the entrepreneurship roots within the Microsoft team. And I'd love for you guys to share this. It'd be great. I do think it's great content, and we definitely appreciate Tim joining the show. Also, please like, subscribe, comment, leave me a review wherever you are listening to this. I'd really appreciate that as well. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.